How do, and welcome back. Well, it's not brew day today. Something happened. Today for me is Sunday, and something happened yesterday that I had to deal with, and it sort of like mixed up my routine for the weekend. So what I'm going to do today is a review of a beer that I wanted to do next week. So it's a little bit young. Hence I'm going to be using a nucleated glass just to give it some help. It could really do with another week in the bottle. This beer is not my creation. I found this on a YouTube channel called Tube Dinos. He's a New Zealander, and I thought, well, I've never used New Zealand hops in any of my beers, and it was a very simple beer, so I'll give it a go. So it's 12 litres and uses a can of Cooper's lager, just your basic Cooper's lager, not the continental one, or I think there's an 80 odd day lager. No, it's just the normal Cooper's lager, no extra fermentables because it's only 12 litres, and then 3 hop additions on day 7, and it's dry hopped for 3 days. So I use 60 grams, 20 grams each of Nelson, Riwaka and Motueka. So 20 grams of each on day 7, and leave them for 3 days and then bottle. So it's been in the bottle now probably about 7 or 8 days, so a little bit young, but let's open it and let's see what it tastes like. Oh, nice steam coming off. It is well carbonated. The bottles are rock solid. Let's see if I can be a bit aggressive. There we go. So this has been in the fridge for about 3 or 4 hours chilling. It's actually still stored at room temperature. I haven't moved it out yet into the garage for cold conditioning. But it looks a beautiful beer. Obviously it's still hazy because it's so young. There's a nice 2 fingers of frothy white head. I always think Cooper's kits give really nice frothy heads on them. It looks very nice and it smells amazing. That 60 grams of New Zealand hops are really coming through in the aroma. But there's also some nice malt there. This he called his Cooper's XPA. So it's not an IPA, there is still a malt profile there. But the star of the show are the hops, no doubt about it. Right, I'm going in. Cheers. Oh, that's really nice. So, a very simple kit. Just a 1.7 kilogram tin of Cooper's. Top it up to 12 litres. I use the kit yeast. I think he used US05. I use kit yeast. And you just ferment it for 2 weeks and dry hop for the last 3 days. Well, 10 days, sorry. And then dry hop for the last 3 days. So a very, very simple kit, but it's a really nice beer. It's not mind-blowing, but it's a nice quaffable, light, nicely hopped, lagerish sort of beer for a nice spring or summer's afternoon in the sunshine. One thing though, because you're only brewing 12 litres, or you're only making 12 litres, you've really concentrated that bitterness. And I've calculated this to be 44 IBU, so you've got to like your bitter beers. On a Cooper's tin, they tell you the IBU of the syrup, not what you would expect when you open a bottle and taste it. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because they don't know how much you're going to make. Is it going to be 12 litres, 15, 20, 23? They don't know. So they tell you the IBU of the syrup, and you have to use a small calculation to determine your final IBU. And that is, you take the IBU on the tin, which in this case was 390, times it by 1.7, and then divide it by the litres that you're making, so in my case 12. That came out at 55. But then they say, and I never knew this, that you lose between 10 and 30% of bitterness during fermentation. So 20% is sort of like bang on in the middle. So I took my 55 and I multiplied it by 0.8 and it's come out at 44. So it's 44 IBUs. But I never knew that you lose bitterness during fermentation. So I actually did a bit of research and I found a scientific paper. You know, it just shows how seriously professional brewers take their work when they're writing scientific papers. It was published in the Master Brewers Association of the Americas. Actually, I'm going to try and share my screen and then you can see it yourself. So I'll press record here. So hopefully you can see this now. It's tracking IBU through the brewing process, the quest for consistency, and hopefully you'll be able to see this is an actual proper scientific paper. Abstract, introductions, materials, methods, just like when you were at school, remember? All the maths that the brewers use, look at that. And then we get the results, and if we go down a few pages, we get this subheading here, IBU loss. And what they found is that out of 14 beers that were tracked for IBU loss during fermentation, conditioning and filtration, the average loss of IBUs for all 14 beers was 33.7% with a standard deviation of 7.9. So you do lose bitterness during fermentation. Here's another thing, just go down a couple of pages. The majority of IBUs were lost within the first 2 days of fermentation, during which we saw losses ranging from 27.1 to 57%. 57% IBU loss. We saw no major changes in IBU after the first 2 to 3 days of fermentation, even during light dry hopping. So it's that crucial 2 to 3 day period where you've got a really active fermentation, there's lots going on in there. This is where we lose most of our IBUs. Also they found that what type of bittering you use, whether it's the 60-minute boil or a whirlpooled addition, also changes how many IBUs you lose. It says here, it appears that beers that rely on whirlpool hops for bitterness tend to lose more IBUs in fermentation. Also, low flocculent yeast will produce more IBU losses than high flocculent yeast. In addition, higher gravity beers lose more IBUs than lower gravity beers. So if you're primarily using your whirlpool addition as your bittering, you're going to lose a lot of that bittering during fermentation, more than you would if you'd used a 60-minute boil. I thought that was really interesting. And then it says, finally, I should also add that we have measured large losses in IBU from excessive blow-off during high Krausen, which can be controlled by antifoam. Now, as home brewers, I think the antifoam that we can get is called firm cap. I believe that's true. You add it during the boil as you're adding the malt, and what it does is it lowers the risk of boil overs, but also during fermentation it keeps your Krausen at a much more manageable level. But that's good, because as it says, if you've got a really high Krausen, you're going to lose a lot of IBUs. So if you're using a whirlpool addition for your bittering, and you get a really active fermentation with a high krausen and maybe a blow off, you're going to lose a lot of your bitterness. It's better to use a 60-minute addition and then use an anti-foam to manage the krausen, and you'll retain most of the bitterness. But yeah, that would be an interesting experiment to do. Make 2 batches, 12 litres, one without anti-foam, one with, and then measure the krausen on each. Use the same yeast and the same amount, measure the krausen on each, and then taste them and see if one is noticeably more bitter or less bitter than the other. And you should be able to taste the difference if they're losing between, what was it, 21 and 57% of bitterness. That's even more than what Coopers said. They said 10 to 30%. So I found that really interesting. I never knew that fermentation takes away from the bitterness of a beer, actually loses bitterness during fermentation. So that's something perhaps to bear in mind. I don't know if you know, your beer software like Beersmith or Grainfather, if they have them in the calculation when they predict your IBU. I don't know if like Mangrove Jacks, when they give you like an IBU, this will be about 20% or 30% on their packs. I don't know if they've taken this into account, but I just find that really interesting, and I like, because of that Coopers tell you the IBU of the syrup, and then you can work out what the IBU is of the beer. All things considered, it makes more sense than just trying to tell you what the expected IBU of a kit will be when it's finished and in the bottle. So that's interesting. Hope you found it interesting as well. Hope it's worked out. The screenshot, the screen capture, which I'll stop now, and that's it. I've really enjoyed this beer. Very simple beer, very nice, just quaffable. It came in at about 4%, 4.2%, and it's a great beer for a nice spring or summer afternoon. So thanks for watching. Sorry there's no brew day, but there will be next week, because I think on Sunday I've got a completely free day, and I'll be able to do a nice brew on next Sunday, which will be up next week. But today I'm actually going out to the ice hockey, so I've got to get ready for that. Okay, thanks for watching. It's been a pleasure, and as always, I'll see you again in the next video. Bye bye for now.